What is up, guys? TopTierYugioh here, and today I've got a new format Kashtira deck profile. I think Kashtira is really good early on in formats because when things are still a bit chaotic and unsolved, being able to play a deck with just a simple yet strong and efficient engine really allows you to take advantage of other players and decks that are still figuring things out. So I think Kash is just a really good choice right now, especially when you look at the format. The matchups are actually really good. So let's go ahead and get into the list. Starting with the Kashtira engine, we're going to start with 3 copies of Fenrir. We all know what these cards do, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining it. But yeah, 3 copies of Fenrir, 3 copies of Unicorn, 3 copies of Riseheart. And then for the 1-ofs, we have 1 copy of Scareclaw and 1 copy of Ogre. And then for the Kashtira spells and traps, we have 3 copies of Pressure Planet, 3 copies of Birth, 3 copies of Theosis, and then finally to finish up the engine we have 1 copy of Kashtira Preparations. So this is a total of 21 engine cards, which I think is absolutely insane because in a 40 card deck it allows you to play 19 non-engine cards, and I'm playing a 41 card deck, so I have 20 non-engine cards, which again is really good early on in formats when things are a bit unsolved because it allows you to play enough non-engine to cover a lot of bases to allow you to sort of counter all of the randomness that you might see early on in formats. And then again, just having a strong, efficient engine, like being able to disrupt the field, the extra deck, the main deck, the graveyard. Like Kashtira can disrupt all zones of the game, as well as having an extremely robust extra deck to throw on top of that, which we're going to get into shortly. But let's go ahead and get into the non-engine. For the non-engine, let's start with the hand traps. First, I've got 3 copies of Shifter, 3 copies of Ash Blossom, 3 copies of Imperm, and then finally for a total of 11 hand traps, we have 2 copies of Ghost Spell, which is something that I've liked a lot right now as it interacts with most decks pretty well, and also anything with the Sinful Spoils engine. It can negate 1 because 1 it can add back from the graveyard. So I think Ghost Spell is actually really good right now, as well as going into future formats. It's almost like the 4th and 5th copies of Ash. In a way, like not quite, but almost. Now, another card that I was thinking about playing in the main deck was Droll and Lockbird, but Droll is, I think, not as universally powerful as Shifter is, as well as it conflicts with Shifter, and so I wasn't too sure about main decking it. It's in the side deck, but I think it is definitely a card that you could main deck, which would, in that case, give you a total of 6 kind of turn skips against a lot of decks. So I do think Droll is also a really good option. Maybe you could play it instead of Imperm, but I like Imperm too right now, so yeah, up to you. But the fact that we can play this many hand traps, I do think is a strength, because most decks cannot, especially not when you add it to all the other non-engine cards that we're playing, such as 3 copies of Pot of Prosperity, which allows us to see every other card in the deck more consistently, 3 copies of Triple Tactics Thrust, which can actually get you 2 Prosperity, or the 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talents. And I think between these 6 cards, this deck is actually really good going first or going second. And then if you combine that with Kashtira's natural proclivity when going second, the effects all triggering when you declare an attack, it makes this deck extremely versatile. Once again, going first, going second, against established boards, or even on empty boards. These are all really good cards, and it's that versatility that wins you a lot of games. Now, one thing I am considering is maybe dropping 1 Triple Tactics Talents for a Terraforming. Or you could just actually add the Terraforming, but I think the ability for Thrust to get you to a Pressure Planet would be really good. However, getting you to a Prosperity is also, you know, almost the same thing. Like, the deck is extremely consistent even without Terraforming, and the one thing I don't like about Terraforming as much is how it does play into Droll. And again, it's not super clear early on in the format if people will even be main decking Droll or not, but I think that's sort of like a how do you say in sports, a game day decision. So that's something I am definitely considering, maybe playing just Terraforming as a 42nd card. Playing 42 cards versus 40 doesn't affect the stats that much, to be honest, like not to a significant margin. So you could do that, or you could drop a Tactics for it, or you could maybe drop both of the bells and then add in Terraforming. There are a lot of different options, but I think the core of the deck remains the same, and the core of the deck is what's going to win you most of your games. Well, that plus your extra deck, which is something that I think a lot of people kind of forget about with Kash right now, especially now that a Riseheart's gone. People forget how good rank 7s are actually. So let's go ahead and get into the extra deck. First, we've got 2 copies of Shangri-Era. Next, we have 2 copies of Sky Crisis, which I think is maybe the biggest addition since Age of Overlord, maybe bigger than the 3rd Unicorn. Oh, that's maybe a stretch. 3rd Unicorn is really nice, but Sky Crisis is still insane. Like, it turns any of your monsters into another form of board breaking, and it really makes it that much easier to just play going second. Like, I really like Sky Crisis a lot in this deck. I almost want to play 3 because it's not like this deck is going to like kill you. So it's like every turn you can just keep dropping these, and it's, well, not, I don't want to say every turn. It's like, if you get to drop it, you're going to be able to break your opponent's board most likely. And if you can't drop it, it means your opponent didn't play enough to allow you to, which means you're also winning the game. So it's kind of a win-win. So I do really like Sky Crisis a lot. But with that, you also play 2 copies of Zeus. As most of your extra deck are Xyz monsters, it only makes sense to play multiple copies of Zeus. And then next we have 1 Draco Sack, 1 Dark Armed, and 1 Big Eye. Now the one thing I don't like about Zeus, in this deck at least, is that if you use Draco Sack or Big Eye's effect, they can't attack that turn. And then for Dark Armed, you have to attack first. And you're never making a Zeus on top of a Sky Crisis because it's not going to have enough materials generally. And so, while Zeus is incredible, the reason you have to play multiples is because you're not summoning one with like 4 materials. So the second one truly does come up. And the other thing you'll notice about this extra deck is that besides Shangri-Ira, all of these deal with opposing boards. Like, these are all board breakers. Except for the last 2 Xyz monsters, which are 1 Flare Metal Dragon, which is to keep you from losing in time, and then 1 Titanic Moth to actually win in time. 1 copy of SP Little Knight, 1 Link Spider, 1 Donner, and then 1 Baron. Now in an ideal world, I think you could maybe play a second SP Little Knight, maybe instead of either the Donner or the Baron, because both of those don't come up that often. But there are cards that, like, when they do come up, you're really glad they're in the extra deck. But at the same time, when the second SP comes up, you're really glad you have that in the extra deck. But this is like $100, and these are like not. So, you know, I think you're good with 1 SP Little Knight. Now, I do think the one card that kind of stands out is the Link Spider. But Link Spider is something that I've been testing and like a lot, especially in combination with Draco Sack. So a lot of times what happens is you'll summon Draco Sack, and then with the Draco Sack, you'll have 2 tokens, right? Now, SP Little Knight requires 2 effect monsters, so you can't just like, you can't link your tokens into an SP Little Knight and then, like, yeah, actually you can't link your tokens into SP Little Knight at all. So what you end up doing is like Draco Sack, effect for 2 tokens, use 1 token to pop 1 card, and then you'll link the other token into Link Spider. Now you have 2 effect monsters. Then you link both of these away into SP Little Knight, clear another card, and then you can maybe even use the other effect to clear a 3rd card. So it's like 1 Draco Sack ends up turning into like 1, 2, 3 cards off your opponent's board, which is actually really good. Like, I don't think there's any other Xyz that in the main phase, like, no, I shouldn't say any other Xyz, but any other way for you within the main phase to pop 3 cards on your opponent's side of the field. So that's really good. So I am a pretty big fan of Link Spider in the deck. But maybe there's another way. If so, definitely let me know. But this was the way that sort of came to my mind as a way to utilize Draco Sack and SP Little Knight to their greatest potential. Let's go ahead and move into the extra deck though, or side deck though, I mean, whoops. And the side deck actually starts off with a very similar fashion of clearing opponent's boards, being 2 copies of Pankratops, which is a card that I really like a lot right now. I mean, Pank is just an absurd card. Bringing this back to 2 is kind of crazy, but I like it a lot, mostly because it clears itself off of the board as well, which allows you to continue your Kashtira plays if need be. And that's also another thing about SP Little Knight. If you do get to use that other effect to clear itself from the board, then yeah, it clears your board and allows you to summon your Kashtira monsters again, which is incredible. So Pank is really good. I've been liking that a lot. We're also playing the 3rd copy of Ghost Spell, 3 copies of Nib. Again, early format, this is going to be a great card. People are playing in everything. 3 copies of Droll Lockbird, 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, and then finally 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier. Now, I might change these out. Like, D-Barrier's been fine, and of course the limited testing that we've had so far early on in this format has been okay. But some other things that I'm thinking about switching it for are maybe a summon limit, or maybe even anti-spell. Like, anti-spell is really good, but summon limit's maybe better. You know, it's kind of up in the air. I like all 3 of them, but I'm not going to play all 3 of them. It's just going to be 3 copies of one of them. So it's between D-Barrier, Summon Limit, and Anti-Spell. Another card I'm thinking about maybe playing is Enemy Controller instead of Pankratops. They effectively do the exact same thing. Like, both of them allow you to play to opposing boards really well, but I do think that Pank is probably better against like Labyrinth and better against some of the back row decks that you might expect to see in a format like this. Now, of course, take this side deck with a grain of salt, because as always, your side deck is going to be dependent on what you're expecting to see at your, you know, whatever event you're going to, whether it be locals, regionals, YCS. It's going to depend on your local metagame. You can't always just like look at one side deck and, you know, play the same cards. It's just not going to work like that, especially not early on in formats where you don't quite know exactly what you're going to be seeing yet. especially when you have multiple new sets coming out in the near future. So we've got Maze of Memories coming out, we've got Phantom Rage, Phantom Nightmare, whatever it's called. I think we've already had Phantom Rage and Phantom Nightmare sets. This is some type of Phantom set coming out in February. So the meta is going to be changing constantly over these next couple of weeks, evolving and continuing to grow. And again, at points like this, when the meta is changing, that's when a deck like Cash is really good and at its best. So definitely take advantage of this opportunity while you can. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, tips, tricks, or anything, let me know down in the comment section below. And thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.